G'day. Welcome to the AgriCoach podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the Financial Bloke. Welcome back to the Wealth and Wisdom podcast. My name's Ben Law, and I'm the Financial Bloke. Money is the root of all evil. I don't deserve to be financially secure. Rich people are normally greedy and selfish. There's never enough money. I'm not good with money. We definitely can't afford that. These are the stories many of us have been told from a young age, which when programmed into our subconscious become beliefs. These beliefs can undermine our confidence and ability, limit our potential, cause stress and anxiety, impact our relationships, and perpetuate negative cycles across the generations. Today, we're going to chat with Hayley Grosser, a money mindset coach who will help us explore the more powerful connection between mindset and financial success. In this episode, we'll dive deep into what a money mindset is, uncover the common blocks that hold people back, and learn practical steps to shift from a scarcity mindset to one of abundance. So without further delay, welcome Hayley.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here today.
Now, I'm looking forward to this one. So let's just get right into the middle of this. What the hell is a money mindset?
So a money mindset is a collective term that we basically refer to as to how you think about money, what you believe about money, how you talk about money and the stories that you tell about money in your situation, and also the general attitude that you have towards money and all of the things associated with money. So it's a really big term, I think, that we utilize so that we get to know what it is that we actually think about money so that we can then identify and have a marker in our mind as to a reference point when it comes to money.
So is that money mindset fixed, like the way we look at things, or can we change it?
It's absolutely changeable. So we have this mindset that we grew up with, that we established as we were children growing up. And so it's just something that we took on as a perspective around money. So we can change that perspective at any time. So that's where a lot of my work sits, is I help farmers change their perspective around money so it shows up differently in their life.
It's interesting because mindset's one of those ethereal things that some people you talk to mindset that they know what a mindset is, and it's the way you think about things in the world or the frame of reference. And they're like, hell yeah, Ben, mindset's the most important thing. And other people are like, that's just woohoo rubbish. I think I heard someone say once that there's no such thing. And the way I always explain it to people, and it's the way you think about the world. It's the lens you view things through. And I look at Elon Musk, Hayley, like he's the richest man in the world and undeniably will probably be the man that has the biggest impact on the world going forward. And, if you took all his money away, you took his billions of dollars away, you took all his companies away, nobody knew who he was, would he become a billionaire again? Hell yeah, because he thinks differently to the average person. He sees abundance, he sees opportunity. And when people say that can't be done, he's like, well, can't's just an opinion. And so I actually think your most valuable asset is your mindset. If mindset is so important to someone like Elon Musk, and he's been very clear about that, how important do you see it is for farmers?
Yeah, I really see it as it's like 90% of success for me. So we can do a lot of things in the paddock and we can do a lot of things around money in the office, but what's actually driving those actions is our mindset. So if we don't have our mindset set up for success around money, then the actions that we'll take and the side effect to that in the paddock is going to be not as optimal as it would be as if your mindset and your actions were flowing together.
And it's interesting. I remember this would be 20 years ago now, Hayley. I remember I had when I was financial advising back in the day, and I had a client that was extremely successful, very high IQ. He was unbelievable. And I remember it was in the middle of this horrendous drought and everyone else was complaining about the weather, understandably, it's dry as all hell. And I remember talking to him and I remember saying to him, I said, oh, how's this weather? He says, I don't know why you're even talking about the weather, Ben. It'll rain eventually. And he just had this completely different mindset around the weather that, it is what it is. Everything needs to be prepared so that once it rains, I'm ready to take advantage of it. And he just got on with things. And that was my first inkling about how important the way you think about things or the mindset you have can be to your success or failure.
Yes, absolutely. And I have a mentor that we have in our business at the moment, and he refers to this as like, how do we do everything to remain lucky? So we can't do anything about the external circumstances, but we can create luck in our own mind because luck is created. It's not something that's just landed on us. So in those times where we've got external circumstances going on around us that we can't control, what can we do internally to be able to control our reaction to the situation and also then the actions that we take so that on the outset of that, and in your terms, when it rains, is that we can be set up in this really fantastic position on the outset of that to make the most of the opportunities that come or the opportunities that come within that. Because there are so many certain elements in time, and we look back kind of to the Great Depression. There was a lot of people who lost a lot of money in the Great Depression, and there were a lot of people who set up their entire fortunes and their entire lives, financial lives, in the same moment. So I've always looked back at that and various levels of time and go, what is the distinguishing factor between the people who succeed and the people who don't succeed in those times, especially when they're adverse? And it all comes down to the way they think about money, the way they perceive money, the way they look differently, the perception that they have of it. And it's like incredible. So I think in terms of mindset, you know, some people can kind of leave it in the corner and think, it's not something to kind of deal with. But in actual fact, it's the very thing that's driving your success or your failure going forward in terms of money.
Yes. Now, Hayley, from your specific point of view, when we talked about this, you went from a financial scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, and that's why you're on this journey you're on now, which I love, by the way. But what specifically triggered you and your husband to go on this journey of discovery and change from that scarcity mindset to financial abundance mindset, and how did you go about tackling it?
Yeah, so there was a couple of different kind of triggers involved in a bigger one, I think, but we found like we were first generation farmers coming in our own business. We'd both grown up on farms that we started that farming business ourselves. So what happened is that we were finding that we were always like frustrated around money. Like we were always hitting a ceiling. There was like no matter what we did with money, no matter how good we budgeted, and sometimes I was budgeting weekly because I thought it was something that I was doing wrong. So I was more intense on my numbers. I knew our numbers inside out and back to front, but nothing was shifting. So we'd have this like really good season, but what would happen, and I noticed this pattern happening, is what would happen is we'd have a great season and then things would happen that were out of our control that would bring us back to kind of this set point or this ceiling. So we would be belting against it the whole time. It was like no matter what we did, nothing would change. The other part of that was that money was dictating our life. So every single decision always seemed to come back to money. And it was like we needed to scale, but the budget wouldn't allow us. Or we needed to upgrade something on the farm, but the budget wouldn't allow us. I remember like my husband would come to me and say, it'd be really great if we could do this, or this would be a great part of our expansion plan. I'd say we can't afford it. Like we just can't. And so he stopped coming to me. His passion kind of dwindled. And so there was all of these things that were going on that we were like at a point where I was like, really? Is this what farming is? Because we came in with all the passion and all the drive and everything being young and fresh. But what happened was we just slowly were wearing down and we were beating ourselves against a wall and we were questioning everything that we were doing. We were wondering what we were doing wrong compared to everybody else. And I think it was just a point in time where we were like, we can't do this anymore. Like we want to break out of this. Like there's got to be something. Like there's got to be something that we're missing. Like I had this really underlying thought that I've got to be missing something because all of my background was in business and in accounting. So I had the knowledge. There was just a piece of it that just felt like it was, a complete miss and I couldn't work that out. So I think we hit rock bottom, and that was the kind of point where we were like, we've got to do something about this or we're not going to be farming anymore.
So one of the things I noticed there, Hayley, is that was you were in a position where there was no money. Money was tight, wasn't it? Due to either just the circumstance that you're in. I even see this in people that are extremely wealthy. So we were talking about this just before we kicked off recording, that I had a family a few months ago which were worth well over $200 million worth of farming assets, in a really strong financial position from my eyes, not only from an equity position, but also from a cash flow. But they had this absolute scarcity mindset, and they were burning themselves right to the ground because they said, we can't afford to get any labor on here, or we can't afford to do X, Y, Z to improve. And one of them was their shoulder was busted, and they were still putting through 6,000 head of cattle through the cattle crush every year using an old mechanical crush. And I'm like, go spend the 40, 50, 60, 70 grand on a mechanical crush. They're like, oh no, we can't afford it. And from an outsider looking in, I'm like, this is just bloody crazy. Like, you can afford it. You're just telling yourself you can't. So in my mind, it's, this poor money mindset isn't just around people that have no money. It can quite often be people that have extreme amounts of money. Do you find that's the case too, Hayley? Today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, so absolutely. So this is probably one of the reasons why I came into coaching, is because what I saw through other farmers was that it wasn't just us happening at a grassroots level where we were starting farming. I was seeing farmers who were coming to me because we'd kind of turned things around. I was seeing farmers coming to me that were earning like multiple millions, up to $10 million plus in their farm, but were also having the same feelings that we were having. So, as a mindset, what we do is it confines us in a box. And we were talking about this before, as you said, is that what happens is, especially when we see incredible growth in farms and growth quickly, and we've seen this in when land prices has increased, there's actually a disconnect between where their mindset is and what their current reality is right now. So it's like their mindset, or the way they think about money and business in the world, hasn't actually caught up to their current situation. So what happens is that their kind of mindset sitting in the past based on the old way of how things were before the growth or before the change. And it hasn't actually just come to the point where they've been able to acknowledge and see what they've actually created in terms of wealth. It's almost like farmers don't even look at their net worth because, I don't know, for some reason they have this attachment to it that if they look at their net worth and they acknowledge it, then maybe that means something different about them, because there's so many stories that we take on about farming, and, whether it's, like you said, the poor farmer or something else, or farming's a struggle, or whatever we want it to be perceived like, we'll keep a mindset and we won't acknowledge things to not move out of that space, to move out of the story that's been continued to be told.
My wife sent through to me the other day, Hayley, she loves to get shock and awe with me and point out my flaws. I think it's a sadistic thing in her. No, just kidding. And she came through because our daughter has a stubborn mother and a pig-headed father. We're quite determined, and my daughter, surprise, surprise, is very much the same, which frustrates me immensely. Surprise, surprise. And she sent through 2 words. She goes, persistence and obstinance. And what I find in the farming world, the different mindsets is there's a difference between the two. And most farmers are very persistent or obstinate. And the way I put it is, persistence is you just keep driving towards your goals, but you're open to a different way of looking at things, and you start to question the stories you're telling yourself and adjusting course. Whereas obstinance is just that head down, bum up. I don't care what anyone else says. I don't care about it. I've told myself a story and I won't listen to anyone else. Is this money mindset rooted in like that obstinance? And to get out of that, what have you got to do?
Yeah. So it's interesting. This always makes me think of that picture. There's a meme that goes around that you see someone who's riding a bike with square wheels, and then, somebody's standing out to the side and they're holding the round wheels, and this person's like on the bike and they're trudging away and they're like, no, I'm too busy. I can't even understand, or I can't take those round wheels, even though I know that it'll help me. And I find that in farming a lot, we get so stuck in the everyday or in just the every part of the operations that sometimes we get so kind of focused on that we can't see beyond that, and we can't pull ourselves beyond the bigger picture. We just do what we've always done. And doing what we've always done comes from a certain mindset. And I think that working hard to make money is so deeply ingrained in farming that most people can't see another way out.
It's interesting, Hayley, when you say that is I'll give an example in my experience in the financial advice field was investing off farm. The common story most people told themselves was, we can't afford to invest off farm. There's no money. There never is any money. And I remember I said to my dad once, there is no money to invest off farm, but what happens if the tractor blew up, the engine? He said, we'd find the money. So this is the mindset. But I used to have people come to me, Hayley, and I can think of one family who were a lovely family, very good farmers, and they wanted to start investing off farm, or the wife did, because normally the trigger is, on average, is mum looks into it. And they came in, they had a big farm, but they'd invest $2,000 and $100 a month.
Yes.
Because they were worried about losing this $1,000. Now, they'd spill $1,000 worth of diesel on the ground every year when they're filling up machines. Anyhow, so the whole time they were fearful about money. So they were like, and they'd ring me up once a month saying, Ben, has all my money got lost? Have you stolen it and gone off to Mallorca with Christopher Skase? For anyone in my generation will know who I'm talking about. But then after 4 or 5 years, I worked with them trying to get them to understand it. And we got to the point where they were doing $20,000 a month was going into their off-farm investments after 5 years. And I remember having the conversation with them and saying, how do you feel about now? I said, we don't even think about it, because we just know that that'll be looked after, and we've changed our mindset around that. And I spoke to them 2 days ago out of luck, and they've got about 1.8 million sitting in their off-farm assets ready to retire. It's just a beautiful story, but there was this absolute scaredness around money to within a short period of time, and it all changed, and it was a journey. So I suppose telling you that story, what I want to get to is, like, you identified this was a problem. You saw other people. Like, how did you specifically for you start the journey? Like, how did you start adjusting things?
I'm probably a very curious person who always wants to know why. Like, why is this so? So I probably delved into every single resource that I could find about money mindset, books, mentors, podcasts, the whole works. I would just literally Google it, and I would basically research the absolute bejeevers out of it. And so what I started to find was that I really didn't know money at all. So I really had this really off perception. And so I was viewing money in a completely different way to obviously the Elon Musk and the people who were incredibly wealthy. And so what I started with is I started to actually get to know money. Which sounds really basic. Most people are like, I know what money is. Money's just money. But what happens is, if I held up, $100 note in a room, and I've done this before in some workshops, I've held up $100 a note and I asked people to tell me what that $100 note is. What is it really? And every single person in that room will give me a different meaning to what that $100 note is. And in the end, I say, well, it's just paper. It's just a tool. But they've had all of this other meaning, and so that obviously drives from our mindset. But what was really interesting is at the end of that, I gave that note to somebody and just said, here, you can have it. And they were highly offended by the fact that I gave it to them because it felt like stealing. So if we think about that, and how we viewed it is so we were viewing this money as something completely different to something other than what it was. It's just purely money. It's purely a tool. It's purely a resource that we can tap into in order to create the life, the business that we want. But we weren't seeing it that way. So we had to really get to understand money, and we really had to know what it was all about. We had to know that it was a flow. Money needed to flow in, money needed to flow out. We needed to know that we were the ones that were responsible and in charge of expanding it, like we were talking about off-farm assets. But the biggest thing that I think we learned in that process around money was actually going back and starting to acknowledge every single moment that money was actually supporting us. Because money had supported us in every single part of our journey up until that point. But for some reason in the future, we thought that it was no longer going to support us anymore for some crazy reason. So we had to actually start to acknowledge and get comfortable and build a new relationship with money in particular. So just understanding that it was there, understanding how it worked, looking after it as if it was a partner or a friend or someone that we really valued, because we didn't have respect for it. We just thought it should show up to us, and that's where we were at. And then we also worked on what we believed to be true about it. We kind of identified what those beliefs were that were holding us back. We worked out where our goals actually were and what we needed to believe in order to create those goals. So say, for example, I can't afford it, for example, change to it's either not a priority right now, or how do we make this work within our business if it is a priority? So the questions changed and the thinking changed around that. It moved from we're only small farmers to every single day we are becoming even bigger farmers. So what we were doing is we were pushing our mindset in a different direction. The third really main thing that we did was we started talking differently about money and the words that we used about money, because how we speak about money or in anything in life and how it rolls out of our mouths is the intention that we're creating for our life. So if we're talking about money like I can't afford it, then basically what we're asking for is more things that we can't afford. So we were very conscious about what we were saying about money, and we were making sure that it was always future paced. So we were always making sure we were talking about money in the place where we wanted it to be. So every single day our bank account is getting bigger and bigger. So we would do that, and then what we would do was we would look for evidence of it. So if our bank balance increased by $1 that day, we were getting exactly what we were talking about. So there was an acknowledgement. And so there's that whole process of going through, and you talked about it earlier where you had people who invested $2,000 and $200 a month, and then they went through to doing $20,000 a month. There's a gradual shift that happens in mindset, because you've got to identify the way you used to think. You've then got to change the way you and move it to how you want to think. And then your brain has to get evidence of a new way so that it is able to filter your life to find more of the same going forward.
Yeah, and the old saying, what you fear, you create. And for me, the negative money mindset, and can you clarify just to make sure I've got this right, the negative money mindset is rooted in fear. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, 100%. Fear, lack, uncertainty, frustration. It's basically rooted in the fear of things running out. Like, if I have it, you don't have it. If I spend it, I won't get it back. It's completely rooted in fear and completely rooted in the meaning that you give it if those things don't show up. And then, so moving then to an abundance mindset. When you're in an abundance mindset, it's the opposite. You actually understand that everything is infinite. Like, money is infinite. It's just learning how to tap into it and see the opportunities. It's about actually, if I'm seeing you winning, then everybody can actually win. You're just then purely, a way that I can see that what I can do, I can achieve. So it's just they're polar, obviously opposites apart.
Absolutely. And one of the things, Hayley, that is become really obvious to me, and I'm embarrassed to say it, but I've spent 20 years in the money game, but I naturally, as from a childhood, got a real negative association with money. So quick story, there was never any money on the farm. I remember a really significant event in my life, which I worked through, was when I was about 7 or 8. I remember mum and dad leveraged up, bought another farm. They went and borrowed money to do it. Interest rates went to 20%. And I remember standing with my dad looking at the wheat crop and him just looking down at me and going, this is the best wheat crop I've ever grown. This is amazing. And then 2 days later, a hailstorm came through and wiped the whole thing out. And I remember being, and at the time, there was a couple of times I saw my dad cry when I was a kid, and that was one of them. It was really built into me. And then going to town, as a kid, and mum had a calculator just after it. And we were going through Woolworths and saying to her, "Mum, why have you got a calculator? The lady at the checkout will do that." And she said, "Well, I don't know if we'll have enough money for food." And I can remember that real visceral reaction, like, "What do you mean we won't have enough money for food?" And then my mum would say things like, "Go get a financial education. Don't be like us, learn about money, how it is." And so for me, right through my early childhood, it was like, and so that manifested really healthily in some ways, but really toxically in others, because it drove me to succeed. So I was far more driven than everyone else. And my wife's the same. But then I found with my daughter saying the same things, when she was 3 and 4, saying money doesn't grow on trees. There's not enough money. You've got to be careful with money. And I remember sitting there one day going, holy shit, I've worked through all this myself. I think through things differently, but now I'm perpetuating it on my child. Do you find that's a really common story in families from the land?
Yes, 100%. And that's my same story as well too. I grew up on a farm. I saw a lot of struggle. My parents would, they'd go off farm to work a lot because, the farm wasn't necessarily making what they did. And I left the farm and I was never coming back to the farm because I saw the struggle. I was like, I'm getting away from this as far as I can, and then married a farmer. But and it's interesting, like even that in itself, because what we do is unknowingly we take our feelings and everything we saw and our heard and our like emotional imprints from those events that happen as a child, we take through to as an adult unconsciously. So in some ways we recreate that. And it was very interesting that I was leaving the farm. I was never coming back out of struggle. Yet I then managed to snag myself a farmer, come back to the farm and put myself in the same situation as what I was as a kid. So we will do that unconsciously. And a lot of the time that's why generational wealth patterns will happen, is because you pick, the next generation up and put them in the same situation. But the other side of me, and this is probably what got me through to here, is that I had the same thing as you, this want to be better and to do better. And I did the same thing. I studied business and then I did accounting, because my parents told me to get a good job, and same thing, go off the farm and make sure you know money. So I had this driver where I was like, no, I'm going to be more financially successful and I'm not having a bar of this when it comes to the farm. But then, equally putting ourselves there. So even though we can go and we can move away from pain, and both you and I probably grew up going, well, we're going to do everything that we can to avoid having the same feelings as an adult as we felt as a child in those times of struggle. But underlyingly, there are still nervous system elements that we'll take through from a child that will just be imprinted without us even knowing, which is the same things that you were starting to talk to your daughter about. It's so interesting, and you can go like, there's this massive kind of event, and I wish there's more research done on this because it's such a generational thing that happens. And it's so unknowingly being passed that unless somebody kind of jumps up within the generation like you and I have done and make a change, then as you can see, like you can see so many farmers have just continued down the same path for 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever generations. And they'll do the same thing because that's what the generation before me did, and the generation before me and the generation before me.
And it turns into guilt is what I find a lot of the time. Is what I run into is people with very strong financial positions that have had multiple generation wealth that's come through. They have this intense guilt that it's, well, do I deserve this? I've got to prove myself. And then they become really fearful of the money as well, which is, I find fascinating.
I love this space too, because the biggest thing that I tell people, it's funny because I teach on money, but the biggest thing that I tell them is money's a side effect and it's actually not about the money. So money only enhances the things that are already happening within you. So, we see this all the time where, some people think, well, having money is greedy. No, you're a greedy person before the person that you saw was greedy had money, if that makes sense. So it's the same with guilt. And you said it exactly there. The driver actually comes from not the money itself, but the guilt and the I don't deserve this, and the, am I worthy of this? Can I continue this on? It's a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. But having the money actually makes it come out. Like money is the trigger, because money is the thing that is readily acceptable in order to kind of put blame on, I suppose, and societal views and all of those things. So what I find is that when I'm working with farmers exactly around the same thing, and it comes from also getting a large inheritance as well too. I've had some farmers who've got quite substantial inheritance, or they've got money that might have come through in different avenues than they thought, and there's this incredible guilt about it. But it's actually not about the money itself. The money itself has just triggered the event because that's the thing that you need to work on in order to become more comfortable with money in the future. And I love that. Like, it's always a trigger. It's great.
and look, the other side of the coin, or the other side of the double-edged sword, is that I see a major problem, which we're not going to go into today as well, is, the old winning lotto. Families win lotto, and then all of a sudden, what is it, like 70% of them lose all the money and 30% of them go bankrupt. So they lose all the lotto winnings plus everything else they had. And there's this mindset I quite often see come through in generations, especially multi-generational, where it becomes like this entitlement. I'm wealthy, shall we say, or I have lots of assets, and that's because I'm smart and better than everyone else. And then that becomes a real toxic thing for them to try and break through as well.
Yes, it's like the other end of the spectrum. And the same thing, money's just enhancing, what's happening inside of them.
Absolutely. Now, how do you identify a negative association with money or a negative money mindset? Just give us a really quick flesh out of a couple of things that people can identify, because I think if you can identify it, you can start to go, maybe this is a problem for me, because I think a lot of farmers, not all, a lot are very self-unaware. They're very clear on how to grow better crops and, buy the best bulls out there, but they're not personally self-aware. So how do you identify if there's some sort of negative association or a bad money mindset? Yeah.
So I think as a general rule, what I say to people is, if you are not in the financial position you would like to be in currently, then there's a disconnect between your mindset and where you're at. So if there's, you can't kind of break that wheel. The second part of that is, if you are in just getting by or you're in struggle, and that could be at any level. So we talked about this earlier. It's not just the person who's only turning over 200,000 that might be just getting by or in struggle. It could be someone who's actually turning over $10 million. They could be having just as much going out as what's coming in. They're kind of just getting by. So that's kind of a trigger that, maybe your mindset isn't lined up. Like, if you find that you've got a terrible attitude towards money, you don't respect it, you don't want to touch it, you judge people who have money, you have negative talk about money, like, I can't afford it, having money is greedy, money doesn't buy you happiness, money doesn't grow on trees, all of those things. You don't need money to, live a good life or anything like that. If you're justifying why you don't have money.
Or if why you do
as well too, it isn't necessarily always negative. If your relationships are being affected by money, or money is the main thing, I think. So sometimes money can be the main thing, a little bit like us. It was like the thing that was front and center, that if we could just get by money, or we could just get more money, then all our problems would be solved. So it's the same thing. If money's the thing that's becoming a part and affecting relationships as well too, I think is a big thing as well. It's really just generally, if you are just not in the place where you want to be financially, there is an element of money mindset that's doing that, because money mindset isn't something that you just do once and then you tick it off. So in every level of, I'll call it wealth, and you might have a different way of looking at this too, in every level of wealth, there's a certain mindset that drives the actions and the results that happen. So for us at the core level, we had to get really good with money in terms of getting our head around it, changing our perspective, which then matched the action we were taking, which then gave us different results. So then what happened is we broke through that ceiling, and then another ceiling would come. And so that's probably another thing. If you feel like you're hitting a ceiling, then your mindset needs to shift first. The next lot you hit, we got to a new ceiling or a new income level or a new level of wealth that we were creating in terms of investments. And then we would get the same thing around money, where we'd hit ceilings and our language would change and things would happen. We'd have to change our mindset then to create a new level of action to take us to the next level. So every single level has a different mindset, whether you're turning over $200,000 versus $200 million. your mindset has to match the level that you're at in order to take the actions and get the results that you want.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So specifically, how can you develop a healthier relationship with money? Like if someone's sitting out there going, I get all that, Hayley, I get all that, Ben, I understand what you're saying, but how do I actually start this? Like where's the first point they should start?
Yeah, the first part is similar to what I said earlier in terms of noticing money. So it's like noticing every single place that money is in your life and get really grateful for the fact that it's there. Because when we start being grateful for the money that we have, then more is going to flow. So nobody, like if you think about it as a relationship point of view, nobody's going to keep coming around to your place if you're mean and nasty to it, don't look after it and don't want anything to do with it and aren't grateful that it's there. Money will come to a place where it's actually welcomed and looked after and acknowledged and thanked for being there. So I think getting grateful about all the money that you have in your life, start thinking about what you want to believe in money. So it's like money's easy to come by. I used to write these over and over again. Money's easy to come by. The smarter I work, the more money I make. Our business is growing exponentially every year. Our bank account is flowing easily. All of these things, I was writing into reality what we wanted. It was creating a new story. So I think we have to work out the story that we want to create about money and go about doing it. The other thing that I would absolutely love for people to do is start getting curious about their triggers around money. So what I mean about triggers is, for those of you who don't probably know what a trigger is that when something comes up with money and it just tweaks something in you that makes you angry, frustrated, uncomfortable, whatever it is get curious about that, because that is the absolute gold and the thing that you need to shift in order for money to come into your life. And so this is where I suppose most of my time sits coaching, is because people don't know how to deal with that or how to sit through that. Because what happens is we'll get triggered about money, we'll feel uncomfortable. And what most people do is they'll offload it in a different way. So they'll do anything that they can to avoid discomfort. And money is the biggest thing that triggers people, like the absolute biggest thing that triggers people. So if we're not actually dealing with the trigger, then it's just going to keep manifesting there and create kind of a blockage in our business. So we need to get curious on what is actually triggering us about money, like what's making us angry, what's making us frustrated, and actually sit through that, because like I said, there's gold in that. There's gold where you want to move forward to it.
Well, someone said to me once, Hayley, anxiety comes with a message, so you should listen to it. If you're feeling anxious, and anger obviously quite often covers up anxiety, but if you're feeling that, be curious about it. What's the underlying message that my body's trying to give me? Because our bodies are far more intelligent than our minds are, aren't they?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like that's the gold. That's the messenger. I always see that your trigger is your guidepost on where you need to go. So every time, and I see challenges the same. And it's like when we were getting challenged around money and still get challenged around money at times, I'm like, well, what's in it for me? What do I have to do? Because if I unlock this and I look into this and I get curious, then exactly what I need to do to take to the next level of wealth and our farming business and all of those things combined, that's the very things that are going to tell me what to do. Like they're guiding me as to where my gaps are in terms of what I need to like fill, or the knowledge I need to get, or the shift that I have to work through. So I think if we can get like I said earlier, like money is always a side effect of us. Like we are the common denominator. So we have to get ourselves right in order to create a change in our money, basically as a side effect to that.
Yeah. It's almost like people's fear around money is, well, it's like the dark, isn't it? The boogeyman in the dark. Once you shine a light on it and start looking at it, you realize the boogeyman's not there or not as scary as you thought it was, and then you can go and address it. And I love this thing about curiosity. I think one of the key, and I've been thinking deeply about this for the last 5 years, Hayley, about what's the key traits that I see in successful people. And when I say successful, I don't necessarily mean just monetary or financially successful. I'm talking about prosperity. Their family's prosperous, they're prosperous, the business is prosperous. And because I think that's what we need to be aiming for, is prosperity, but they're always curious. So they're curious about the stories that are being told, and they look at it through the lens of everyone else is not the problem, money's not the problem, I'm the problem. So how can I view this, or what's the story am I telling myself so that I can actually tackle this problem and get on with it? The problem's not external of them. And I'm a coach, you're a coach, we challenge people. I say to people, our job is to not make you comfortable and give you a hug and tell you it's all going to be okay. It's to challenge you, but sometimes people have just got to get real. Is this story you're telling yourself real? Is the position you're in true, real? Is this boogeyman you're worried about real? And then when people start to get real, then they can start to go, okay, well, how do I fix this problem? And is the story I'm telling myself right? And I just want to finish off on this, Hayley, is do you find a huge amount of resistance in people when you start having these conversations because around beliefs, like you start challenging them? And is that a common response?
To an extent, I think by the time people come to me, they know that there's an inherent issue. Like they're coming to me because it's become so blatantly obvious that money is a big problem in their life and the way that they see it. But there is resistance to the everyday person who maybe have not come across this. There's a resistance to going, it's not me, it's the weather, or it's a season, or something else. They'll continue to put the blame outside themselves. But I think most of the time though, people are pretty, like I said, self-responsible once they get to me. They're like, actually, they've had enough opening to mindset work to know that, okay, I've got responsibility here and I'm coming to you because I need help with my money. We want to create a farming business. We want to be successful. We want to pass it on for future generations. And I do not want myself to get in the way of that, because they know that, there's a part that they're playing in that, and they understand it and they want to work through it.
And it's interesting, Hayley, one of the things because when people come to me, they're not. So I spend a fair bit of time working with people trying to crack that nut, and it causes a hell of a lot of angst and frustration a lot of the time when I'm challenging people and saying, hey, is this bullshit? It sounds to me like bullshit. Let's talk it through. And they're not ready for that. So it makes it really hard. But one of the big nuts I've tried to crack is that people to stop thinking about being farmers and start thinking about being custodians of family wealth. Because whether your wealth's tied up in a farm, off-farm assets, whatever it might be, you're the custodian of that wealth. And to do that, you've got to start thinking about money, not just about bulls and cotton crops and stuff like that. And so if you've got a negative mindset when it comes to that, it's going to make it awful hard. You're going to pass it on to your kids, pass it on to your grandkids. And ultimately, it's how should we put it? I think it's a contributing factor to what I call the 3-generation curse, 2 generations to make it, 1 to lose it. And I think if people can actually get their money mindset right, I think they'll have a far better chance of avoiding that curse. And I think, again, it was Elon Musk said, I'd rather be an optimist and wrong than a pessimist and be right. Whereas I think so many people, because they're obstinate, will go, nah, I'd rather be right.
Yes, absolutely. I have so many conversations where people will say to me, the season's playing out this way, blah, blah, blah. I'm really pessimistic. And I'm like, but what happens if you're wrong? Like, do you know that that's how it's going to play out? Like, who's not to say it's going to be the best season ever? And they're like, but it's, the weather's doing this and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, we could be all completely wrong. How about we just focus on the path of being optimistic and doing what we can do, because it's much better than kicking ourselves down the track because we didn't take the action because we had decided that it was going to turn out a certain way.
Absolutely. Love it, Hayley. Well, this has been amazing. I could talk to you about this for 2 days. I love the topic. I've struggled with it myself in the past, and I work continually really, really hard on this. I'd like to say I agree with you. You've got to change your mindset, and it's an ongoing process. You can't just do it once and fix it. So where can people find more about you online, Hayley, the Abundant Farmer? Tell me all about it.
People can find me Facebook at Hayley Grosser, the Abundant Farmer, and on Instagram at The Abundant Farmer, and also on LinkedIn as Hayley Grosser. So The Abundant Farmer is basically a group program where we work through this with a group of farmers. So we're in a community where people can actually celebrate the fact that they're either winning with money or they're having challenge with money, and they've got the support. But basically 90% of what I'm doing in that situation is I'm working through with farmers everything that we've talked about today. So we look at where they're currently at, all of their mindset that they're at, what they actually want to create in the future. What's their vision? What wealth do they want to create? And then how do we go about working their mindset and matching that to their vision and where they want to go? But also the biggest part probably is working on those triggers around money. Like, why is money triggering me in this situation? Why is money showing up in this way? Why am I being challenged in this way? What is in it for me? And I help farmers work through what's actually in it for them and what their learning is and what the gold is on the other side. So they can all take their business, life, wealth, and you call it prosperity, I call it abundance. It's funny, in my program I say we talk about money as much as we need to talk about money to look after it, but everything else, it becomes a side effect because it actually becomes more about you. And the biggest probably side effect that I get from this program, other than money, is the fact that we have improved communication in business and in between partners. We have better relationships, because it's like when you crumble the money kind of problem or the money challenge, all of that filters into every other part of life, because money's a relationship game, business is a relationship game. Relationships and family are obviously relationships. So when we actually break down money, what I find is everything else in other areas of life changes for people. And you would find that also.
Without a doubt, because when it comes to money, for most people, it's fight or flight, can't make good decisions, react badly. It's an unenjoyable experience to be in. So if you can get rid of some of that fight or flight in your brain, can only be a good result. Thanks, Hayley. That's been absolutely amazing. Before we head off, I'd like to ask everyone this. If you could go back in a time machine 10 years ago, what advice would you give a younger Hayley?
Yeah, it'd be follow your instinct, get curious. Don't accept anything as just life, because nothing's set in stone and everything is changeable. We just have to change our perspective and the way we see it.
I love it. I love it. I think curiosity is a superpower.
Absolutely.
Well, that was a cracker of an episode. I think I say that every time, but I really enjoy doing these podcasts, especially when it comes to mindset. I think it's one of the most important things you can possibly do. Just a couple of notes. I just want to summarize at the end. I think money's a real problem for a lot of people, and it's been a real problem for me, even though I am the financial bloke, because of my family history. And I think in the rural space, a lot of people deal with the same thing, whether that be a guilt about having money, and that's more common than you think when you dig into it. You might not think that's the case, but for some people it is. And then for others, it's that scarcity, it's that lack. Are we going to lose? What's going to go on? And I think the first place you've got to start, as Hayley mentioned, is gratitude. I think gratitude is the antidote to anxiety or depression. It's very hard to be anxious or depressed when you're grateful for things. So one of the things that we do in our household regularly, or we try and do consistently, is at the end of the day, we'll say 3 things that we're actually grateful for at the dinner table. I find that's really helpful in reframing things, and it's really good for Sophie, who's now 8, to be able to start to create that. The other thing that's really important too is to start to become really personally aware. If you are being, as Hayley used the word, triggered, if you are feeling anxious around money, or if money just is a problem for you, is start to look at the reaction you're having, how it's manifesting, and then start to realize that the problem's not money, the problem's with you. Now, I think this is a really good way of looking at most of the problems in your life. And I get a lot of kickback from my clients when I challenge them on this sometimes, but I think it's really important. We need to start viewing our problems in life as originating from us. Now, I don't mean that you are necessarily the problem per se. You know, other people might be behaving badly in the family. It could be that there's a drought. It could be interest rates have gone up. But it's like, well, if the problem was because of me, what do I need to do to be fixing this? And start looking internal before you look external. I think that's a really important point. But above all, I think the mindset that all of us need to have, I really struggle with this, but it's, I think, critical, and that's be curious. So be curious about everything. And especially when someone disagrees with you, you should be like a border collie with a tennis ball. Soon as someone disagrees with you or challenges you on something, is get curious. Why do you disagree with me? What do you see that I don't see? And that's what you see in really successful families, is they're persistent, but they're not obstinate. But above all, I just want to tie this off with your mind is your most powerful tool, and it's your greatest asset and your greatest weakness. So make sure you guard your mind. Be careful who you surround yourself with. Be careful who you listen to. If you want to be abundant, you want to be prosperous, you've got to take care of that mind or the mindset that you actually have, because it'll be the thing that digs you out of trouble if you get into trouble. It'll also be the thing that helps you enjoy prosperity or success when you see it. So that's it for this week. If you've got any questions, drop me an email, ben@thefinancialbloke.com.au, and I'll see you for the next episode.